Right, so that's actually taking down by about -10 dB. You can see on the scale here the gain reduction. And to compensate that, I've boosted it by about 5.5 dBs. And the ratio is quite high, so it's squashing quite a bit. If I bypass it, you see it will peak about the same amount. Yeah, but you can hear it's much more like poppy, a bit more slappy now, rather than it sort of going. It's more like, you know. Well, that was pretty ridiculous, but yeah. So yeah, that's used to trigger the sidechain again, but I'll go along with that a little bit later. Right, the next channel next to it is the clap, which is sitting underneath it. And what's different about this one is that I do start with EQ again, similar style EQ actually. On this one I've got an enveloper. Now an enveloper is a transient designer. Some of you may have seen the Rezo Future Music Masterclass, which is absolutely amazing. The guy obviously knows his stuff, and the transient shape that he uses it all the time gets him some really interesting sort of results. And there's one built into Logic called the enveloper, right? And this means that you can change the attack and release of a transient of a sample. So just to demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take off the release. You can hear it. It's just taking off the very end of that clip, right? And if I do that, and then I increase the attack, you'll really start to hear what it's doing. You see that? It's giving it much more of an instantaneous sort of click, a slap. And what it's doing is it's detecting the transients of the audio, and it's boosting its volume, almost like an expander, which is an opposite of a compressor, in a way, which gives it more dynamics. Okay, I'll take this back to how I had it originally. It was about there. So it's all about these little changes that makes up like a whole in the end. So all this compression and EQ hasn't really done much significantly to the sound, but it will do at the end. And on top of that, on top of the enveloper, I decided to put a compressor just to get a little bit more juice out of it. This is set to opto mode. I quite like VCA as well, but you just have to sort of click through them to see which ones you like. Okay, next up is all the sort of hi-hats and percussion. So let's go through those. Oh, this, incidentally, is coming out of multiple outputs of an ultra beat, which is like the sort of the rhythm drum composer of Logic. I don't normally really like to use this because it's got a few bugs that I don't really like. But you can see here you've got different outputs. See all these numbers here. So 3, 4, that's a stereo pair. 5, 6, blah blah blah. I leave 1 and 2 because that'll be that channel there, and I like to keep those blank for I don't know, so I know where that is. Basically, it's like a little marker. Okay, so I'll solo these. Right. Oh, hold on, wait, before I do this, I was going to go through the snares and clap bus. I apologise. Here we go. So I've bussed those together, the clap and the snare, and I've done some further EQ. You know, layering bits and bits and bits. Now that's peaking quite a lot. That's going over 0 decibels by 5.1. To sort of combat this and to make it a bit more solid, I've added some overdrive. This is basically just sort of, it's distorting the signal, decreasing its sort of overall dynamic range. It's squashing it, crunching it a bit, and I've driven it by about 5 dB, and I've actually reduced that by 6, so it sort of evens out a little bit. Now, if I play that with it on, you can hear that's quite solid, and without it, it almost sounds the same. It sounds a little bit more dynamic, but it's peaking by, you know, 5.1. So I've added this on here to give me a bit more headroom to mix with. It's all about these little changes that you can add. And on top of that, I just wanted to squash a little bit more out of that, so I've added a limiter, the adaptive limiter in Logic, which has got not only does it have like the input scale for the limiting, it's also got some kind of sort of analog gain control on there as well. That doesn't just change the gain of it, it actually adds a little bit of something to it. It's like an analog modelling limiter. I'm not quite sure how it works, but it's just what I've read and heard. So that was the snare thus. Sorry for skipping that bit. I haven't opened this project in a long time, so I'm actually going through this from almost new as you're following me going through it. So, you know, I'll probably miss a few bits or, you know, skip a few sections by mistake, but I'll try my best. Right, so anyway, moving on to the hats, as we were saying, all together. In fact, I'll do the shape as well. So this is most of the percussion I've got going on. And for people who are just starting to sort of make dubstep or even just electronic dance music in general, a lot of people get stuck on their hi-hat work and getting it right and sounding sort of coherent with the rest of the track. Well, don't worry, because it's all about getting the sum of the parts that make a whole. And what I mean by that is, if I just solo separate parts of all my hats in individual things, you know, they sound, you know, just boring plain. So that's just that going on. It's a weird sort of open-closed hi-hat combo. And I've got this layered underneath it. That's a little audio loop that I've chopped up, changed. Then I've got, I think this is an Apple loop shaker. Yeah, that's it. Sort of cut up again, and just some individual shaker going on, and some of this, some ride, and a little sort of clicky shaker hat thing going on. Right, so these sound not too great on their own, but when you piece them all together, it makes something completely different. You know, it's all about the different sort of polyrhythms that go together to make this whole thing. So if I solo them all together, it will sound like this. So immediately that's more engaging, better to listen to, and with everything else, just make sure I haven't got anything soloed. Sounds like this. So basically what I'm trying to say is, don't worry if your hats aren't sounding too good. It's all about layering different types and finding a groove of the track. Coincidentally, all these things have been quantized to some MPC swings, which I've imported off a website. I believe it was logiccafe.com. If you search MPC swings for Logic Cafe, you'll find them there. And these are the swings taken from the original MPC 3000, which is the MPC hardware sampler range, are notorious for their sort of great swings and feel. Many hip-hop heads use them. You know, they've been around since like the early 80s. People still use them. People make whole tracks within this one sampler box. People still do. Some of the most famous hip-hop tracks will be made just using an MPC. You'll be very surprised what you can do with it. And instead of using swing from Logic, the MPC swings actually have quite a funny little thing to them. Like, for example, the very beginning of a note here that I've just drawn in, using normal swings, that won't be moved. But with the MPC swings, it just sort of varies it a little bit, like drags it a little bit forward or a little bit behind the beat, sort of depending on which position it's in. And that sort of makes it sort of unique, you know. I highly recommend them. They're great to fun sort of play around with. So that's, all these beats have got a little bit of swing, a little bit of movement. If they're on straight 16ths, it would sound quite rigid, and that's not really what dubstep's about. Dubstep's more about the sort of the swingy, the bass, I don't know, it's sort of come from garage, which was very heavily swung, and reggae and dancehall and things like that all have a certain sort of swing feeling to them. It's all about finding the right one that's good for the track.